Chapter 4 Irrelevant Backstories, Purple Eyes, and a Non-Lethal Abortion. 4.1 Brahma survives being impaled by razor-sharp claws but dies from peanut allergy. A few weeks later, which felt like years accounting for the time dilation in the divine dimension, Brahma finally reached his destination to Rangda's inescapable eternal prison. He quickly realized that term inescapable was incorrect, as there was a tunnel, an indication that Rangda clearly had been able to dig herself out. But how had she managed to dig out from a prison made of the second hardest material in the universe? Brahma realized that he was to blame. After convincing his colleagues to spend years building the inescapable prison to punish Rangda for her crimes, instead of just killing her, he had stuffed up in the last minute. Before sealing the door to the prison, he had thrown his engagement ring, which incidentally was made of the hardest material in the universe, at her. With such a useful tool at her disposal, it was only a matter of time, a few millennia, for the evil space demon to get out through digging herself a hole using the ring. Brahma called out Rangda's name, and shortly after she walked towards him. Brahma said, "Ugh, you have really aged a lot since the last time we met." Rangda said, "No, this is my true form, the grand beauty of a Xenu-Zetan hybrid, the Queen of Xenus, destined to be the ruler of the galaxy." Brahma said, "Whatever. You're still ugly, and besides, there are none of your people Xenus left in the divine realms, as we killed them all." Rangda said, "Really? Is that so? I suggest you have a look behind you." Brahma turned around, and as he did, his chest was pierced by the sharp claws of a Xenu beast warrior, with the end of the claws sticking out from Brahma's back. Reacting instinctively, Brahma channeled his chi energy and crushed the skull of the Xenu beast warrior with a well-aimed blow. Rangda said, "How did you survive that?" Brahma said, "I'm just that badass." Rangda said, "I see. Xenus, charge!" Another dozen or so of Xenu beasts emerged, and Brahma had no problem killing them all, despite being supposedly mortally wounded and a lot smaller than the Xenus in physical size. Rangda said, "Very impressive indeed." Brahma said, "Your Xenus are dead, and you're next. Any last words?" Rangda said, "I don't think so. They might be dead, but they served their purpose." Brahma said, "And that was?" Rangda said, "To weaken you enough for this." Rangda pulled out a bag with dehydrated peanut powder and threw it at Brahma's wounds. This was a deadly trick, as Brahma, just like many other Zetan, had a severe peanut allergy, and getting the toxins in peanut powder straight into his wounds was enough to kill him. Rangda wanted to increase her own power and give Brahma a more spectacular death, however, so she pulled out the magical plot device. The corrupted Zeto crystals, magical trinkets that radiated evil and destruction. Aiming the trinket towards Brahma shattered and absorbed his soul, causing his head to explode. At least this was what Rangda thought happened, although in reality both the bluish Zeto crystals and the black corrupted Zeto crystals were about as useful as the healing crystals that one can buy on a local flea market. Thus, it was Brahma's severe peanut allergy that caused his head to explode, killing him on the spot, and not the supernatural powers of the Zeto crystal rocks. Chapter 4.2. Keila collapses during a meeting, has tremors, wakes up with purple eyes, and no one seems to be bothered. Simultaneously with Brahma's unfortunate passing, Keila was holding a meeting with her subjects as the democratic God Queen of Eden. Being the democratic God Queen had the benefit that none of her subjects had the audacity to question her decrees or follies. But it also had the drawback that many of them didn't fear her enough to actually implement what she ordered. In the middle of the meeting, Keila suddenly dropped to the floor with severe epileptic convulsions. The seizure was because her strong telepathic bond to Brahma made her feel what he was feeling, i.e., she wasn't feeling very good. Eventually, the shaking ended and Keila ended up with a much stronger bond to Rangda than she had before. This caused her eyes to turn purple, the same eye color that Rangda had. Metatron rushed up to her and spoke. "Keila, are you okay? You had severe epileptic seizures, and now you wake up and you have purple predator eyes. All of a sudden." Keila said, "I'm fine, Metatron. As a matter of fact, I have never been better." Keila gave Metatron a foreboding smile that made him wince away from her before daring to speak again. "But, Keila, you had a severe epileptic seizure. How can you be fine? And what happened?" Keila answered nonchalantly. "Oh, not much really. My divine guide Brahma was brutally murdered by the evil space demon Rangda. Rangda has now bound herself to me, making me a lot more powerful. But don't worry, despite being bound to an evil demon, I will use my newfound powers to make the solar system a better place." "Ha ha ha ha." Metatron said, "That doesn't sound good at all. There must be something we can do to help you." Keila's very shifty and unreliable captain of the guard, Melchior Dorovich, joined in on the conversation. He said, "Stop worrying, Metatron. She said that she was fine." Metatron said, "Have you ever seen anyone have seizures and then wake up with purple eyes before?" Melchior said, "No, but it doesn't bother me. Keila can have whatever eye color she wants. As for her being possessed by an evil space demon, we both know that such things don't exist. Now, let's conclude the meeting so we can have food and drinks." Metatron said, "So, you are just going to ignore the health and sanity of our leader so that you can go for food and drinks?" Melchior said, "Yes. Can we have a vote in the assembly, please?" As it turned out, the assembly voted with a large majority to ignore Keila's condition and proceed to the food and drinks, as they were all thirsty and alcoholics of biblical proportions. 4.3. Rangda's unnecessarily long backstory compressed. In another book that I have written, the Divine Sedition, Rangda's very long backstory is written in great detail. But time is money, and Rangda's backstory is not that important for the overall plot for this satire. So here comes a considerably shorter version. Rangda's mother, Kalyanka, was a Zetan scientist who was left behind on the Xenu home planet, Zenora, after a botched research expedition from Zetani to Zenora. Against all odds, she managed to survive on planet Zenora as she became a goddess or a sex slave or a hostage for a tribe of Xenus living on the North Pole of Zenora. Over the years, she taught them everything she knew, fell in love with a Xeno, and eventually an unlikely set of mishaps caused her to fall pregnant, giving birth to a Xenu/Zetan hybrid, Rangda. Rangda was born, and together they lived happily for some years, until Kalyanka died from skin cancer, as her Zetan skin could not handle the strong UV index on Zenora. Losing her mother to skin cancer caused Rangda to snap, and she made it her life goal to annihilate the peaceful and prosperous Zetan Galactic Empire. As it turned out, Rangda had plenty of time to prepare her Xenus for the unnecessary war, as she was immortal and neither aged nor got sick due to her status as the only Xenu or Zetan hybrid in the universe. Eventually, Rangda had trained the Xenus enough to fight the Zetans, and she started off with several wins, due to the Zetans' peace-loving nature and dislike of wars. Eventually, one of the Zetans, named Yahweh, came up with a brilliant plan to stop the war of the two planets, to utilize and mind control another intelligent species, humans of planet Earth, to fight the Xenus for the Zetans. This changed the tide of the war, as the humans fighting for their prophecies and God's orders were almost as aggressive as the Xenus. But they had a lot better equipment and slaughtered the Xenus on every planet. Rangda realized that if she could not beat the Zetans, she would better join them. Changing her appearance to that of a beautiful Zetan woman, she managed to seduce the Zetan Brahma and infiltrate the Zetan homeworld of planet Zetani. Once she was on planet Zetani, she set off a supernova explosion that destroyed most of the Zetan galactic civilization. And for this crime, she was sentenced to an eternity in the inescapable prison in the Divine Dimension. But now she was free, and she could resume her quest to eliminate all the Zetans and become the evil demon queen ruling the entire galaxy. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 4.4. Rangda serves Keila her war strategy on a platter. Rangda was studying Keila telepathically from the Divine Dimension. She was starting to get restless with her human puppet, as Keila seemed to be unable to do anything at all on her own. Rangda wanted to involve humanity in a massive war to weaken them enough for a Xenu invasion. But all that Keila seemed to care about was her fit body and various reality shows. But then Rangda realized that Keila maybe was so useless because Brahma had only spoon-fed her stuff and stopped her from thinking on her own. If this was the case, she could be mighty useful for Rangda's cause. Unfortunately for Rangda, Keila was too far away from her to connect with, unless they both were suffering from concussion at the same time. And this was easier said than done. Rangda had banged her head against the wall several times in the last month, but it had all been in vain, as Keila's brain had been in peak performance every time. Oh, what a headache. Literally. Meanwhile, Keila was studying herself in the mirror after a gym training session. She had a super tight body and great features. She should be able to seduce any man in the solar system, and yet she was stuck with Metatron. And it was all because of her purple predator eyes. Every time she tried to give someone a sexy look, they just ran away in terror, fearing for their lives. This was so unfair. Keila had tried to cheat on Metatron for months as a payback for him having sex with Alicia White to delay her. But then a bright idea came into Keila's mind. What if she just ordered some tinted lenses and wore them instead? Then she'd be sexy again, and men would run after her, instead of running away from her. Filled with joy, she jumped up in the air and then fell over, hitting her head on the bathtub, knocking herself out. Seeing this, Rangda knew that time was short. She ran with full speed to knock herself out against a wall. But she hit it a bit too hard. So although she managed to get a connection with Keila, it was a bit patchy. The message Rangda sent was: pose as Alicia White, infiltrate the Terran Council, cause House White to argue with House Rashid, also cause House Muller to argue with House Cheng. Convince the houses of Earth to open the portal on Earth to the divine dimension and fight the Zetans. Unfortunately, due to patchy interdimensional connection and Rangda's poor English, the message Keila received was this: attack the insignificant House Rashid's outpost, Al-Jadid Salam, pretending to be House White, and then rob a House Cheng bank, pretending to be House Muller. It is beyond the scope of this story to tell how they could misunderstand each other this much. Although for Keila, the message she received was a lot more useful for her quest to liberate the Martians from the Terran Council. 4.5. Akram Rashid. Who is that? What? Death to the infidels. A month later, Ibrahim Rashid was having his afternoon tea and smoked his shisha in the shade of his tent, erected on the penthouse terrace of Rashid Tower in Rashidium. This was the life, drinking a cup of delicious tea and smoking a hashish shisha flavored with lemon myrtle. How could one have a better or more relaxing time scheming new ways of making people miserable? Suddenly, the peace was broken when Ibrahim's personal assistant, Abdul the eunuch, came in yapping with his high-pitched voice. Ibrahim Rashid said, "Insha'Allah, Abdul, what is the matter? has my latest child bride delivery been delayed? Abdul the eunuch said, No, it's much worse than that. Akram Rashid has been killed in a suicide bombing. Ibrahim Rashid said, Akram Rashid? Who the hell is that and why should I care? Abdul the eunuch said, It's your beloved grandson, Master Ibrahim. Ibrahim Rashid said, Oh yes, that's all right. These things do happen. Besides, I have a large harem of wives and countless children. I must have hundreds of grandchildren. I lost track of most of them. Abdul the eunuch said, You have 182 grandchildren, to be specific. Ibrahim Rashid said, So I have plenty of other grandchildren for spares then. No need to worry. Abdul the eunuch said, But Master Ibrahim, Akram was killed by American suicide bombers from house wide. Ibrahim Rashid said, What? Whatever the Americans do, we must fight back. How dare those Americans copy our method of warfare and brutally murder my innocent beloved grandson? Jihad, death to the infidels. Abdul the eunuch said, But Master Ibrahim, we cannot invade America. It's impossible. Ibrahim Rashid said, You're right, Abdul. Let's settle for this by hijacking an American cruise spaceship and brutally murder American tourists. To spice things up, we can send weapons and supplies to factions that hate House White on Mars. Abdul the eunuch said, Excellent plan, Master. Make the Americans fear us enough to avoid senselessly murdering of your family members. Ibrahim Rashid said, Good, that's settled. Now, when will my child bride arrive? Abdul the eunuch said, I will have to get back to you about that. Ibrahim Rashid said, Good. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 4.6 Problem with the File Attachments. Bjorn Muller was sitting in his luxurious office on the Phobos base, where he was back after his rape allegations against Alicia White, which had caused her mysterious disappearance. Fortunately, Bjorn was not a suspect of her disappearance, as Alicia and her operatives had dropped off Bjorn's lifeless body at the Phobos base and had then quickly taken off, evidently not keen to answer questions. Bjorn checked the calendar. Apparently, it was Father's Day back in Europe. But would he call his vile racist father to celebrate the occasion? No, he wouldn't. Suddenly, there was a knock on Bjorn's door, and as Bjorn shouted, "Come in," there he was, speaking of the devil, Joachim Muller himself, Bjorn's father. Bjorn Muller said, "What are you doing here, Dad? I thought you were celebrating Father's Day back on Earth with your other children." Joachim Muller said, "So, you remembered that it was Father's Day, and yet you didn't call me. You're a terrible son." Bjorn Muller said, "Still 5 minutes to go before midnight." "Happy Father's Day, Joachim." Joachim Muller said, "Nice save, if I actually came for Father's Day." Bjorn said, "Okay, so why did you come then?" Joachim Muller said, "Do you remember the video attachment you sent the other day? The video that supposedly would prove that you were raped by Alicia White?" Bjorn said, "Yes, of course. I have been wondering why you haven't got back to me about that." Joachim said, "Well, I'm here now, but as it turns out, you're an even bigger idiot than I thought. The video you sent did not prove any of your allegations. Instead, it proved that you raped the terrorist Keila Eisenstein 5 years ago, an event that was probably the catalyst for her murdering your grandfather a few weeks later and starting this damn rebellion." Bjorn Muller said, "That was not a rape. I paid her to act all scared on the video." Joachim Muller said, "So, you admit to paying the woman that murdered your grandfather just weeks before the murder. The same woman you have been chasing for 4 years. Oh, Bjorn, if you were not my son, you'd be dead by now." Bjorn said, "Okay, no, I didn't pay her. I did rape her. She was in reality my sex slave before she escaped." Joachim said, "I feel like you're having a severe credibility issue, Bjorn. Oh well, it's very fortunate that Keila is dead, so we won't have to dwell on this any further. I sincerely hope that she'll stay dead as well." Suddenly, Admiral Wellington rushed in and interrupted the father-son moment. "I'm very sorry to interrupt you, gentlemen, but I have an urgent report. The Al Jadid Salam outpost in the asteroid belt has been attacked by American suicide bombers. House Rashid has retaliated by boarding an American cruise spaceship and taking 1,000 passengers as hostages." Joachim Muller said, "American suicide bombers killing Muslims? Geez, the world is going crazy. Bjorn, get the fuck out of this office. I need to discuss this matter with Max." Bjorn said, "But this is my office." Joachim Muller said, "I don't care. Now get the fuck out and get yourself some candy." Having said this, Joachim threw some money on the floor to humiliate Bjorn. Fortunately, Bjorn was well aware that the only coins his father carried were actual gold coins, so he eagerly picked them up and left his father alone with Max Wellington without throwing a tantrum. Chapter 4.7 An obviously tampered crime scene. A few days later, Bjorn Muller arrived at the Al Jadid Salam outpost in the asteroid belt as an independent investigator representing House Muller. Bjorn was about as untalented in crime scene forensics as he was in everything else. But his father had sent him anyway, as he needed Bjorn's luxurious office on the Phobos base for himself. Bjorn studied the crime scene, and even he could establish that quite a few things were dodgy, to say the least. The victims had died from multiple bullet wounds, and yet the supposed attackers were left at the crime scene, having blown themselves up. Why on earth would anyone act this way? And how come the supposed attackers were decomposing as if they've been dead for a long time, while the victims still looked pretty freshly killed? He decided to discuss his findings with a local investigator from House Rashid, Sharif Sim Salabim. Bjorn Muller said, "Sharif, from what I can tell, these men cannot possibly have been the perpetrators. Akram Rashid and his men." Sharif Sim Salabim said, "Silence, you mongrel! How dare you question the Prophet? Peace be with him." Bjorn Muller said, "I didn't question your Prophet, Sheriff. I questioned your competence. How can men who have been dead for weeks have killed Akram a few days ago? These bodies have obviously been decomposing for weeks." Sharif Sim Salabim said, They haven't been dead for weeks. They look more rotten because of their ungodly behavior. While Akram and his maids' bodies still look fresh due to the purity and God-loving lives they have led. Bjorn Muller said, "Okay, but how do you explain that the medical status bionic chip in the attackers' brains indicate that they died 3 weeks ago, when Akram was killed only 3 days ago?" Sharif Simsalabim said, "Shut up, Kafir. Don't question me with your fake gods, your fake technologies, or your fake news. We believe that House White killed Akram, and until you can prove otherwise, be respectful to us." Bjorn said, "But I just did prove otherwise." Sharif Simsalabim said, "You are no longer welcome here, wretched unbeliever. Now leave before we proclaim jihad on you." Bjorn Muller said, "All right, I'm leaving now." After his argument, Bjorn took his shuttle to the closest asteroid bar for some well-deserved drinks. The shit that he had to put up with. Chapter 4.8. The House White cruise ship is destroyed and the hostages are killed. A few days later, House White, led by the incompetent Colonel Mark White, conducted a failed rescue attempt of the prisoners on the hijacked cruise spaceship America First. This was a tragedy that caused the death of over 1,000 prominent Americans, but one man who was very satisfied with the outcome was the chairman of House White, John White. The terrorist attack had killed off many of his rivals from other powerful families in North America. And best of all was that it was clearly the Muslims' fault. Thus, some things had not changed in America in the last 800 years since the 21st century. When something goes wrong, always blame the Muslims. No. Just kidding. The only smolder in the beaker for John White was the way his operatives had died. From the images he had seen, it appeared like they had died from activating the secret self-destruction mode he had built into their combat gears. What if the same fate had fallen on his sweet homicidal daughter, Alicia White, who was still missing? John thought of her maniacal laughter, her sweet, sharp, blood-stained fangs, and her glowing yellow eyes, and suddenly he was filled with misery. It wasn't fair that he had lost someone so unique and precious. He wailed and cried for hours, which turned out for the best, as he didn't have to fake grief when delivering the press conference about the botched rescue attempt. Chapter 4.9. Keila faces disappointment over her not-so-immaculate conception and performs a non-lethal abortion. A few weeks later, Keila woke up and felt sick again. Was a stale, listeria-ridden rockmelon the culprit this time, or was it something else? Concluding that she had not eaten any rockmelons lately, nor has she eaten any strawberries that have needles on them, she finds it strange that she had not had any period in a while. Keila realized that she might be pregnant. How cool was that? Could her special divine connection bless her with an immaculate conception? The future Messiah of mankind that would unite us all for a better future, in alignment with the true Maker's wishes. If that was the case, it would hopefully be a girl that she would name Sabina. Since most previous messiahs and prophets had been men, it was time for some girl power. But then Keila realized that there was a slight problem with her immaculate conception theory. That she definitely was not a virgin. As a matter of fact, she had been going at it around the clock with Metatron since she got possessed by Rangda and her eye color changed to purple. She would not have been the Virgin Mary even if she wanted it to be so. Anyways, there was only one way to find out. To go to the medical bay and have the medical robot run some tests. The tests gave both positive and negative answers to Keila. On a positive note, she was pregnant with a girl. Yeah, girl power. On the negative side, it was not a case of immaculate conception, but just a plain old traditional copulation, as the father of the child was undoubtedly Metatron. But what would she do now? Keila had a revolution to start, and besides, a normal conception of birth of a girl prodigy was too mainstream and boring. Then she came up with a foolproof plan. To close her eyes and wait for her visions to come up telling her what to do. After a while, the vision conveniently came up, showing her future daughter, Sabina, at an Edenite adulthood ceremony 14 years later. The funny thing was, the age of an Edenite girl to be considered as an adult was actually 12. Meaning that her daughter Sabina was meant to be born in 2 years' time, and that she wasn't meant to be pregnant in another year and 3 months. Ooh-hoo! So why was she pregnant now? Her visions had shown her the way. She could have gotten pregnant at the right time, and thus she had a whole year and 3 months to lead her glorious revolution against the Terran Council. Using the 29th century's technology, she instructed the medical bot to perform a non-lethal embryo extraction on her and save the embryo cryogenically frozen for use the following year, when the time was right. After the procedure, Metatron showed up and was very upset with Keila. He said, "I heard you had an abortion earlier today." Keila said, "No, a non-lethal embryo extraction to be exact. I was originally hoping for an immaculate conception from a Zetan Grandmaster, so I was a bit disappointed when it turned out that you were the father." Metatron said, "You were hoping for an immaculate conception after having sex every day for 2 months with me? How does your brain even work?" Keila said, "I wonder that myself sometimes, hee hee. But don't worry, my visions told me that I will give birth in 2 years. So I had a non-lethal embryo extraction and will give birth to Sabina in 2 years. Now I just need to liberate Mars from the Terran Council and kill Bjorn Muller. Hey, now I got a whole year." Metatron said, "Wait, your visions told you this? Your suspicious visions also told you that it was a good idea to confront Alicia White and her goons alone and unarmed." Keila said, "Well, I did survive and she died, didn't I?" Metatron said, "Yes, due to a chain of completely unlikely events." Keila said, "Ha ha ha ha. A chain of unlikely events is my middle name." Metatron said, "No, it's not. It's Susanna." Keila said, "Oh, don't be boring, Metatron. You know what I mean." Metatron said, Okay, but if you die during this stupid rebellion, I will insert the embryo into a surrogate mother next year. Keila said, "Cool, we have a deal." As it turned out, Keila's vision was inaccurate. This was because the true maker, the supreme God and almighty creator of the universe, the source of her visions, had mixed up the age of the adulthood ceremonies. This was because the true maker thought that every Jew used the age of 13 for female adulthood ceremonies, but the Edenites were conservative Jews, and thus they used the age of 12 and not 13 instead. Thus, if the true maker had been good at his job, Keila would have stayed on Eden, raising her daughter with Metatron in peace. But now, due to his incompetence, she would start a chain of events that would end with an evil space demon almost destroying the galaxy. Thus, if you ever have a bad day at work, remember that even fictional supreme deities can fuck up at times.